Some childhood wounds are easy to point to: a door slammed, a voice raised, a night nobody came. Emotional neglect isn't like that. It's remembered as almost nothing. No scene, no villain, no story that sounds serious out loud. Just a quiet, private feeling. Everyone else seems to know how to have a moment. I never learned how. It doesn't look like the kind of childhood that makes people flinch when you describe it. There's usually no single incident to point to, no scene you could act out that would make someone gasp. You may have had meals, clothes, a decent school, a bedroom of your own. Your parents may have shown up to every recital and worked themselves exhausted to pay for it. This isn't a story about cruelty, it's a story about absence. And absence is a strange thing to grieve because there's no memory of it. Nobody forgot to take a photo of the moment that never happened. What usually went missing wasn't care in the practical sense. It was someone noticing your internal weather. Nobody sat with you after a rough day and asked what the feeling actually was. Nobody helped you tell the difference between angry and embarrassed, or between tired and sad. So you learned to handle whatever was happening in your chest completely on your own. And because nothing dramatic ever happened around that, you probably filed the whole thing under normal. Because compared to what exactly? Picture the version of this that plays out at something as ordinary as a work retreat. Someone standing in a circle doing a trust exercise, waiting to fall backward into a coworker's hands. Everyone around them looks nervous, a little thrilled, visibly moved once it's over. When it's their turn, they fall, get caught, stand back up, and feel almost nothing. Not fear beforehand, not relief afterward, just a flat, polite blankness, and the same quiet question from the hook. Everyone else seems to be having a moment right now. Why can't I? One sign shows up early and stays late. Not knowing what you feel, even when your body clearly does. Someone asks how you're doing, and fine comes out, before you've even checked whether it's true. Meanwhile, your jaw is tight, your chest feels heavy, you're short, with people, for no obvious reason. The feeling exists. It just never got a name attached to it, because naming emotion is something children usually learn from someone else doing it for them first, out loud, in real time. Without that, the sensation doesn't disappear. It just stays a little wild, unlabeled, showing up as exhaustion or irritability instead of whatever it actually is. A second sign is feeling guilty the moment you need something. Asking for comfort feels like asking for too much, so you apologize before you've even finished the sentence. You'll listen to a friend for 2 hours without checking the time, but sending a message that says, "Today was hard, can we talk?" feels almost unbearable. This usually isn't shyness. It's closer to a rule that got written a long time ago, quietly, without anyone announcing it. Your needs make things harder for people, so keep them small. You can see this rule operating in something as small as a birthday. A friend asks what you actually want this year, specifically no hedging, and your mind goes completely blank, or worse, defensive. Honestly, I don't need anything comes out fast and automatic, even when part of you had been quietly hoping to be asked. Wanting things on purpose out loud can feel oddly exposing when you spent years learning that wanting less made you easier to be around. If any of this is sounding familiar, this channel exists for exactly this kind of recognition, so it might be worth staying around and subscribing. A third sign, and one of the more disguised ones, is being unusually good at reading everyone else's mood while being oddly disconnected from your own. You can tell the second someone's tone shifts. You notice a slightly harder than usual set down of a coffee cup and immediately start scanning for what you might have done. That skill wasn't random. In a home where a caregiver's mood set the emotional temperature for everyone, learning to track it early was protective. The cost is that all that attention pointed outward left very little pointed inward, so you can often tell what a stranger's face means and struggle to answer a simple question about your own day. Comfort can also feel strange rather than soothing. Someone says something kind, and instead of relaxing, part of you tenses, half expecting a catch. That reaction makes more sense once you consider what closeness meant growing up. If reaching out for emotional support usually got met with impatience, or confusion, or simply nothing, The nervous system draws a fairly logical conclusion over time. Needing people is not safe, so don't. That belief doesn't announce itself as fear. It just shows up as unease whenever someone tries to get close, dressed up as independence. None of this requires villains. Some of the most emotionally neglectful households are also the most functional looking from the outside. A parent working 2 jobs to keep the lights on may have had almost nothing left over for a long conversation about feelings. Not because they didn't care, but because they were surviving too. A parent who was never taught how to sit with their own sadness usually can't teach a child how to sit with theirs. Intent and impact aren't the same thing, and a child doesn't experience intentions. They experience what was actually available. Researchers who study childhood adversity have found something worth sitting with. This kind of emotional gap is genuinely common, more common than people assume, and it shows up in adult life in fairly consistent ways, including a harder time naming emotions, difficulty trusting closeness, and a nervous system that stays a little more braced than it needs to be. None of this means a difficult adulthood was guaranteed. It means an environment shapes what gets built inside a person, quietly, over thousands of ordinary days, not one dramatic one. Maybe the clearest sign of all is doubting whether any of this even counts. Nobody hit me. They paid for everything. They loved me the best way they knew how. All of that can be true at the same time as something real still having gone missing. You're allowed to hold both. Your parents may have done what they could with what they had, and what you received may still not have been enough for the child you actually were. This doubt tends to get louder the better your childhood looks on paper. It's strangely easier to trust your own experience when there's an obvious villain in the story. Without one, the mind reaches for the tidiest explanation available, which is usually some version of, "so it must have been me." Maybe you were too sensitive, too demanding, too much. That conclusion isn't evidence. It's just what a child's mind does when a gap needs an explanation, and no adult ever offered one. None of this is really about assigning blame decades later. It's about finally being honest with the part of you that adapted to an environment that didn't have room for its questions. That part learned to be easy, useful, low maintenance, impressively self-sufficient, because those were the traits that got noticed. What it didn't learn was that it was allowed to simply exist, unimpressive, needing things, and still be worth showing up for. Healing this usually starts small, almost embarrassingly small, pausing before the automatic "I'm fine" long enough to actually check. Naming a feeling out loud even when you're only 60% sure it's the right word. Letting a compliment sit for a second instead of immediately deflecting it. Telling one safe person the true version of your day instead of the easy one. None of these fix everything at once. They're closer to teaching a much younger part of you, slowly and patiently, the thing nobody got around to teaching you the first time. That what you feel is real information, and it never needed to be dramatic to deserve attention.